What's up, guys? Welcome back or welcome to our show called Behind the Mask. I'm Chris.
And I'm Becca.
And today we have a treat. This is somebody you guys haven't seen before, and is Madeline Barlow from Drexel University. Madeline, can you introduce yourself to the people?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Dr. Madeline Barlow. I work at Drexel University with all of our athletes, all 18 teams, so all different sports. And I also have my own business, Mindwise Mentoring, where I work with high school, college, and professional athletes on the mental side of sport. So whatever comes through around the mental side of the game, you'll find me helping athletes and supporting them through that part of their journey.
Yeah, you guys are in trouble because now you've got three people, not just in psychology, but in sports psychology. So sorry about it, but not at all. So we wanted to have Madeline, and continuing with our Unlearning series, we're talking about this concept of like being strong at all costs with athletes, and we're going to look at it from a couple of different perspectives. But before we do that, Madeline just wrote a book, which I'm so excited to read. Which I think is absolutely brilliant concept. So Madeline, if you want to tell everybody what the book is about, your motivation for writing it.
Sure. Yeah. So first and foremost, I've always wanted to write a book. So for anybody out there that has any type of dream at all, just do it. Make it happen, because it's something I've wanted to do forever. I never knew how to do it or even really what I wanted to write about. So I really let the inspiration come to me through the majority of athletes that I work with. And so the book ended up being called The Highly Sensitive Athlete: How to Embody the Magic of Your True Self in and Out of Sport. So it goes through the journey of being an athlete within sport and what it is like to be highly sensitive there, but then also that transition out of sport and into life after, and how to really use your sensitivity to your advantage in all areas. And so I love how this is going to connect to what we talk about today, because I was thinking on my walk with the dog this morning about how you don't often hear the words strength and sensitivity in the same sentence or even in the same vicinity at all, if we stop to think about it. And why I wanted to write this book is to actually bring those two things together and show that if you are a highly sensitive person and athlete, you are equally strong as anyone that maybe isn't as sensitive. So it's about reframing what it means to be a sensitive athlete.
Yeah, no, I love it. And Madeline sent me her dissertation about transition life after sport, and it is brilliant. I also sent you like 17 questions after I read it, so I apologize for that. But it was awesome. So it's one of the reasons why, like, I'm super excited, if you guys don't already notice, to have her on the show to talk about this, because you're absolutely right. Putting the word sensitive and strong in the same sentence, like, does not compute. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up in the world of sport. So it transitions us to our topic, which is about, like, as athletes, we learn, like, you got to be strong at all costs, bend, don't break, stoicism to a fault, all of that. So Bex, I want to start with you, and then Madeline, I'll get your take on this. What does strength in an athlete context actually look like? What do you think?
So what does it look like? Like, what do we think it looks like, or what do I think it actually is?
Both, wherever you want to go with it.
So I think in sport, we do athletes a disservice, and I think we do humans a disservice because of that concept of a wrong definition of the word strength. And again, I'll use my own experience, and I think for me, being strong as an athlete was constantly denying my body, denying my heart, denying my feelings, and just pushing until you hit the breaking point. And I actually had a conversation with somebody the other day, and I said, as an athlete, if I wasn't dead on the grounds, I kept going, and I was fine. And I thought that's how it should be. And I think whether or not that was my own heart issue that just got mixed up with sports culture, I think it is more common than we talk about, because I think it's normalized. So I think this concept of strong, and where does vulnerability fall in that? Where does speaking your truth fall into that? Where does acknowledging the days that you're not okay fall into that? And I think we have, and I say we, I should say me, as an athlete, like I could never connect the two. And I think that's why I get so excited about Madeline's book too. Like, we just don't, this concept of sensitivity and that being okay, and that actually being an asset to an individual, like that's unheard of, kind of, because in sports context, we don't go there.
Yeah, no, I love that. Madeline, what are your thoughts before I respond?
Yeah, really, Becca, you talked about like this conditioning, right? It's a conditioning in sport and sport culture that strong means do the most. Do the most or you're not doing enough is one of, I feel like, the most classic sport conditioning beliefs that is out there. I myself, same thing. I was red in the face, panting on the floor, right? And that was enough. And I'm air quoting that, right? But especially in life after sport, it's taken me personally so many years to come to a place where I'm now finding a balance between working hard and resting, because we need both. And so working hard and taking care of myself in a more fluid way, a more intimate way, even coming home to myself, really. And I wasn't offered the opportunity to do that or even shown how to do that while participating in sport. I was a swimmer, by the way. I swam for 14 years. And I know, I mean, every sport has its own thing, but swimmers are always like, oh, swimming's the hardest, right? Everybody says that about their own sport, which is fine. But I'll say it for myself, because it was relative to me. And swimming really took everything, right? It took everything out of me. It gave me the highest highs and some of the lowest lows, for sure. So one of the things I want to comment on that you just said, Becca, was that something like reaching out for help really isn't, or reaching out for support isn't super valued in sport. And we're told, just, you can do it, like, be mentally tough. You're an athlete. You don't need help. Like, you're good. You're tough. Keep going. Right. But something I like to invite people to think about is that as an athlete, you've never actually done it alone. You've always had support, whether that's in a coach. I mean, what athlete has done anything without a coach ever? Honestly, none, really, none. Maybe like the, fair few, but honestly, no, probably not. Doesn't make sense. And same with having your teammates. Those are people that you have around you and support. So really, we've never done it alone. We've always had support. So reaching out for other forms of support, especially when it's something that's about more emotional, psychological, mental support, is going to be the strongest thing you will ever do. So that is the gap that I really want to fill. And it sounds like you are really trying to fill as well, is that strong can be reframed in whatever way we want to. It doesn't have to mean do the most. It can mean stop where you are and ask for support.
Yeah, and I love that. And I love that. I have a follow-up question when it comes to mental toughness, because I feel like that is a buzzword. Everybody loves to throw it in there. Be mentally tough, but don't actually know what mental toughness is. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on clarifying what that is. But before I say that, I feel like, even in a little bit of response to what Becca was saying, absolutely do the most. Like, if you're not doing X amount, you're not doing enough. And what's interesting about the support thing that you brought up is, the only kind of thing that they encourage your athletes to ask more of is training. Train me more. I want to lift more. I want to run more. But there's never any, athletes are not necessarily conditioned to ask for the things that you're saying. Like, I'm uber stressed out before training today. well, maybe go ask somebody for, no. Just like, you shouldn't be stressed out. Your sport should be an outlet, this. And it's like, well, sometimes sport is a stressor for most people. It's not necessarily an outlet. So, but I think as it relates to strength, there's almost a thought that athletes are idolized to some extent in culture. So when there's a little bit of a crack in the armor, people are like, well, what's wrong with you? And it's like, I'm a human who happens to play a role. Bex, we talked about this yesterday, who happens to play a sport. Thus, I'm not perfect. So there's a couple of things that pop into my brain that I want to ask both of you about. One is, how does perfectionism play a role in this? And two, what is actual mental toughness versus mental toughness through the lens of athlete culture? So Madeline, I'd love to ask your thoughts on the mental toughness piece. What actually is it? And then what is it, like the way we try to conceptualize it through athlete culture?
So mental toughness is actually something that I've been trying to stop using the term in general. And I've been trying to do that for a while, even though it seeps back in, because it is something I was actually taught about in school and while getting my PhD. And so it's just one of those things. You're like, okay, it's there, sure, maybe, but I don't really love it. The more I learn, I don't really love what it's claiming to be. And I even remember my first year of my PhD, Dr. Jack Lussick was at our conference and he was listening to a talk I was giving, or I was on a panel about injury in sport. And this was so long ago now, which is wild, but you remember certain things, right? And he's a pretty big deal in the sports psychology field. And he was the one that first said, I don't actually like mental toughness. It's just attitude, right? Like he calls it attitude, really. Because I do feel like maybe there might be more that we can get from something like attitude, and it takes off that layer of, mental toughness can become this armor. And when it, like you just said, when that cracks, ooh, now you're exposed, right? It's like, oh, you're not mentally tough. Like, what's wrong with you? So he really tried to call it more so attitude. But what it is supposed to be, or defined as, is, the ability to overcome obstacles regardless of what is being thrown your way, right? Just like moving your way through all these types of obstacles. So what I've actually tried to also reframe it as is just finding your innate confidence. When you're innately confident, which I believe confidence comes from within, not from things we're doing in our sport or school or whatever. When you find that within yourself, that is what can help you to move through all these different obstacles. So dropping this lens of mental toughness equals, impenetrable, idolized person, like you said, because athletes, sport is what we do. It's not who we are. I've said it so many times, and I have to keep bringing that back, because it's what we do. It's not who we are. We are people first. So therefore, let's drop that lens of, mental toughness equals superhuman, perfect, can do it all and need no support to do it, which again is a fallacy, because we have support the whole time. So yes, I like the idea of dropping that and really making it more, I am accessing my innate confidence and the belief in myself to move through whatever it is that's thrown my way, including asking for support.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think when I think of mental toughness, I think like Rocky movie. How many times can you get punched and knocked down until you get up and like keep on moving? But that's resilience. So it's not the same thing. It's like, it's almost like in terms of toughness, how much can you get beat? And Becky, you were talking about breaking your body down so that you don't break, but like you are to some extent. So I love that, like decoupling who we are with what we do and clearly defining what some of these phrases are. And I also love the idea of like reframing it as just an attitude that you have, which is really, when coaches talk about that, that's really what they're saying. They're really talking about like, do you have that kind of swagger about you? Are you more kind of stoic when things happen? Are you able to be resilient, mentally resilient, or agile to bounce back and move into the next thing? They're not really saying like, how actually tough are you? If I punched you in the face right now, would you punch me back? That's not really what they're talking about. So, but that's how dramatic the language is when you use it in like a motivational speech. That's how dramatic the language is. So, and before Bex, I want to shoot the perfectionism question to you, but what popped into my brain from one of my favorite sports psychologists, Michael Gervais, you probably know because I talk about him all the time, as it relates to confidence. And he just says, confidence is what you say to yourself, which can be informed by a number of things. But to echo your point, it's not informed by necessarily external things. If it is, it's fleeting and it's not going to last very long. So we want to like make it something that's more intrinsic. But kind of segueing, Bex, I wanted to shoot the perfectionism question to you. Where does that fit in this concept of being strong almost to a fault in athletics?
Are you shooting this question to me because I'm a recovering perfectionist?
No, but I also am. So this is basically an AA meeting for perfectionists.
Yes, it is.
Yes. What is your question? Perfectionism in sports?
Yeah, as it relates to our theme, being strong at all costs.
I think perfectionism is actually very counterproductive, but we don't realize it. I think, Chris, we were talking about this yesterday, the roots of that perfectionism can be a whole number of things, and different for each athlete. But I think, and again, I'm using my own experience. I can't say this across the board for every athlete, but for me, the drive to be perfect and then feeling like in order to be perfect, I had to be strong. It became this weird, the two collided a lot because obviously as a human, I'm not perfect and I'm making mistakes and I'm struggling mentally, emotionally, physically, whatever it may be. But then the need to be perfect, I was frustrated with that. And then the need to be strong felt like I needed to deny the frustration and keep going. So it's this constant, I know for me, it was just this constant war of you got to be perfect, you got to be tough, you got to be strong. And like, they dovetailed and just sent me, so frustrated all the time. And I think the need to be perfect, again, wherever it comes from, for me, there was a lot of fear underneath of that, but feeling like I needed to be perfect. And then in the definition of being perfect, you needed to be strong. And I love what you guys are saying about the mental toughness. And really what we're talking about is mental flexibility, and the ability to bounce back and the ability to say, oh, that didn't really go well. How can I navigate and how can I be, more like water to use a reference and just kind of navigate with the landscape and with my circumstances. But when you're a perfectionist and when you feel this need to always be strong all the time, it squashes your ability to be flexible. So it's actually counterproductive.
Yeah, no, I love that. And what pops into my brain, and Madeline, correct me if I'm not correct in this line of thinking, but in sport, we need to be adaptable and creative to do what we do at the highest level of what we do. I think about in my position, I'm a goalkeeper. We put our bodies into all kinds of unnatural positions. I always forget how unnatural it is until I have to demo it for my keepers being out of retirement or being retired and hurt all the time. So I have to then show them this movement and I'm like, my body is not supposed to run this way. I digress. But we have to be creative to think out of the box, and the higher the level you get to, the more creative you have to be. So, but I feel like, Bex, to your point, the perfectionism presents some rigidity in our thinking. so much so that, and I see it even with this new generation of athletes, if what is happening in the game doesn't reflect what we did in training, they have no clue what to do. And there's a like fear of failure of coach told me I had to do it this way. And regardless of what the situation looks like, I have to do it that way. So we're putting a square peg in a round hole. And it's like, but then as coaches, and we'll talk about like this, what it looks like in a coach perspective in a second, but like, we're like, we'll just be adaptable. But in training, that's not what we're encouraging. We're encouraging you to do it the way we told you to do it. But before we shift to that, Madeline, I do want to ask you a question. Like, how can we, that's not the way I want to frame it. So in athletics, it's emotional. I don't know how anybody can say athletics is not emotional. So when we like try and decouple sensitivity with strength, it almost seems illogical because like the highly passionate athlete is also highly emotional. So then how do we almost destigmatize that within athletics to make it something that if it's not you ripping the ref's head off or you celebrating a goal, everything else that's in between, how do we allow for a space for that to be acceptable, for a space for that to be like encouraged?
Yes, so this is really a main theme of why I wrote my book, because something that I think isn't understood across the board, and even for myself, I had to do the research to really gain an understanding of this, is there's a difference between being sensitive, and especially being highly sensitive, and being hypersensitive. So being hypersensitive is when, you know, we have yet to learn the coping skills to navigate our emotions. Because yes, we are emotional beings. Humans experience emotions, right? And you can't just shut it off. If you do, I just talked about this last night on someone's Instagram live, where we're told like leave it at the door, right? It's like a classic thing that even I myself, and I'm holding myself accountable for it, a couple years ago had used that phrase too when I was working with athletes. Oh, we're going to leave it at the door. But that, I feel now, is not useful, because now we're asking people to just pretend like they don't feel things. That doesn't work. What happens is it gets stuck within us, it stays with us, and it's going to come out in a hypersensitive way. Where in swimming, you might see someone rip their goggles off and throw them against a wall, or in tennis, they might throw their racket, right? Those aren't appropriate ways to deal with our emotions, and it's clearly evident on the outside, versus what it means to be open to your emotions and sensitive to what you feel, think, believe, see, right? You're a bit deeper, you're seeing things on a deeper level in that instance. That really is when you can take those emotions. Ooh, I'm feeling frustrated. Taking your example, Becca, of like feeling really frustrated, often with that perfectionism or that fear coming through. Fear is another really good example. You notice it and you say, huh, what's this signaling to me? What needs to change in order for me to be more effective in whatever I'm doing? So you were using emotions as a signal. That would be a more effective way. You're out on the field, right? You're in the middle of a game and you're noticing frustration. Huh, what do I want to adjust based on this frustration? Versus having a more hypersensitive reaction, which is when, again, we haven't been taught the coping skills. So that's the intention, is to find ways to share this with coaches across the board. So I do even have a special chapter devoted to coaches in my book, which will get me some we'll see how that goes for some people. But that was the point. The point is that we all need to take ownership of our role in working with athletes, working with humans, so that way we can share different resources, the right support for people if we notice them being hypersensitive, and also recognizing someone who may be more highly sensitive, and what are some ways we can help them feel valued so they can use that sensitivity to their advantage and the advantage of the team.
Boom, you guys, right? Take notes on that whole part. Love it. Great job. Yeah. So my takeaway from that is it's not a character issue. We don't have the language to describe how we feel. So the reason why this popped into my head was we just came off of a pandemic season with a bunch of nonsense that's been going on. And it's now the age of like athlete mental health, talking about things that haven't been talked about before. And I feel like there was a fine line with depending on the coach of, oh, but this is a character issue versus, or they're walking onto the field with a number of things that are affecting everybody, plus some things that might just be unique to them. And they haven't been taught the language to like actually present that. So then it just gets brushed off as a character issue, which is so interesting to me because there's so much preparation that goes down in sport. But there's to like talk about, hey, I really need help learning how to kick with my non-dominant foot or something like that. There's so much language with an athlete for you to advocate for yourself in that regard. But athletes don't get taught how to advocate for themselves with the stuff that's going on in between their ears, with the stuff that's going on in their body, with, and all that stuff. So I think, yeah, 100%. It's a great point of, can we create an environment? I did a talk once about psychological safety as it relates to this similar point of like, can you create an environment where not only failure is encouraged, which was part of that talk, but also that your athletes can come in with 100% of their context, and you can teach them how they can respond versus just brushing it off as, well, you're being dramatic today. Or one of the things we spend a lot of time talking about is like destigmatizing when an athlete gets frustrated and angry and responds to it in a not productive way. Instead of being like, go sit in the corner, that's not acceptable behavior. It's like, maybe I should teach you how to actually respond. Because if you watch professional athletes who also don't have some of these tools, depending on the athlete, we watch them lash out. So you just end up doing a lot of what you see. So yeah, to that point, I want to segue kind of a little bit to coaches and how can coaches create an environment for this too, where we can almost destigmatize this and not just tell athletes to be mentally tough or to get over it or to shove it or to fake it till you make it, or I have a million cliche athlete phrases that I can throw out. So how can we educate coaches in this way? Madeline, let's start with you, and then Bex, love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, all of those statements right there were so cringy because they're very cringy. And I'm gonna assume all three of us have heard those statements at one point or another. And again, when you look up to your coach, right? Your coach is an authority figure to you. More often than not, that's what you know. That's what you hear. So you take it. And that's where the conditioning is created. Oh, for me to be my best self, I need to push those things away, or I need to be this person instead of my truest self. And that's why that, the subheading of my book is really embodying your true self, because that's what we want to get from people. When we are embodying that, who we really are in all ways, as much as possible. Sometimes it's got to shift like a tiny bit. But when we're really embodying who we truly are, we're going to be more successful in whatever we do. So that would be the environment that I'm really hoping to help coaches to enhance. And it starts with the coach themselves. So this is the instance where if we're sitting here inviting athletes to find strength within themselves to reach out for support, I'm also going to invite coaches to do the same thing, because coaches need to learn these things too. Some of them have not learned it. And the difference is some of them are a lot older. And so sometimes that makes it harder, right? The can't teach an old dog new tricks thing. Now you can, but there is a barrier, right? Because when you do go for a long portion of your life, not learning, again, similar language that we're talking about here, or those coping mechanisms, to deal with whatever's coming up within themselves, to also have separation from themselves as coach to what their athlete is experiencing and not projecting their own life experiences, right, onto an athlete. Where, okay, a coach might deal with something this way because that's who they are. Or for them to recognize, okay, that's my coping mechanism. That's my way of doing it. But what I want coaches to understand is we can have an open conversation with an athlete to just decide, hey, what's your way? What's your life experience, or what's your way of navigating your own emotions? Let's not project that, because we don't need to teach people our way. We want people to learn their way of dealing with whatever it is that's coming through. So first and foremost, and maybe that's honestly where I'll stop, because it's big work to ask anyone to look inward. It's not easy. You know, I try to do it as much as I can. I think it's so important. I work with my own coach, my own life coach, pretty much, because I want to and I need to. I want to keep learning about myself so I can make sure I'm not projecting my stuff on the clients I work with or the athletes I work with. So my invitation is for coaches to dig deep and recognize, or even look in the mirror, I guess you could say, and see where there might be work for them to do so they can really influence their athletes in a very positive way.
Yeah, really good. What I'm hearing is countertransference is real from a coach. If you're not, sorry, non-psychology people, you might have a couple phrases you got to Google, but that's what we're talking about. And what's so interesting is it's such a flawed system. So you've got coaches who were athletes for the most part that don't get learned most of the time, don't get taught skills to cope with certain things, who are now teaching athletes who also don't have the skills. So it can be like kind of a recipe for disaster when things hit the fan. So that's why I love your point of like, it starts with the coach. So like to and through the coach of like, coaches have to be willing to do their own work to figure out how they're going to counter transfer their own stuff or project their stuff onto their athlete. Keeping in mind that coaches hold a position of authority, and based off of your relationship with that athlete, they might even idolize you a little bit. They might really, really look up to you and want to emulate you. So the little things of how we handle failure, how we handle stress, how we handle anxiety, how we handle difficult conversations, a lot of times is reflected in your athlete. I always hear the phrase, I'm not a parent, but I hear the phrase like, your kids are your mirror, like they mirror you. They literally do what you do. Our athletes can be the same. They mirror us. So when we choose to not pay attention, or we choose to have this rhetoric of like, yo, be tough at all costs, our athletes are going to have that rhetoric too. And then we can't be surprised when they don't know what to do, pretty much. So Bex, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this before we kind of give some takeaways and wrap up. So what do you think?
I think this is so good and so important. I think there's also, Madeline, as you're talking about, inviting the coaches in to do the work that we're asking athletes to do. I think there's also an element of humility that has to come in there. And again, humility isn't something that sports culture encourages, but I think when a coach can look within themselves and say, okay, here's, for example, here's an area I'm hypersensitive, or here's something that, I struggle with myself. Not only does it empower them, give them a lens to perhaps see the world through the eyes of their athlete in a more empathetic way, but it also, I think, creates a culture where there's more humility involved, and they can look at an athlete and be like, this kid struggles in this way. Maybe the coach identifies with that, or maybe not, but regardless, they can be like, hey, I struggle too, maybe just in a different way. And it creates, I think, an environment that's a lot more empathetic, and it's a lot more open for dialogue and change and authentic conversation, because everybody's now on the playing field of like, hey, we're human, and being human can be hard, and being a human playing sport is hard. So I think that I was thinking about that as you guys were talking, and I think that's really important and really necessary in the world of sports and within a team dynamic. And also just echoing the point of, yeah, athletes are, I think of myself as an athlete, you know, how much I loved and respected and looked up to my coaches. When I was young, yes, but even so in college. And I'm coming off the first season of being a coach and realizing, like, looking at my athletes and looking at how many times they look at me when something goes wrong, or when, you know, there's a call, or when an umpire gets it, you know, whatever it may be, and how many times they look at me to see how I react. And I'm like, oh my, you know, like, and it's humbling. And it's, the reality of it is, I think the coach needs to display a certain degree of resiliency and a certain degree inability to be flexible, and an ability to be highly sensitive and invite their athletes, if that's how they're wired, to also be highly sensitive, but in a way that you're responding to circumstances rather than reacting, which I think would come from the hypersensitivity. So yeah, I think it's such an important conversation, and an uncomfortable conversation, again, because sports, we try to fake it till we make it, but so necessary to just start changing the narrative.
Yeah, I love it. Gems left and right, you guys, gems left and right. Well, we're going to run out of time, so I just want to have each of you share kind of a takeaway for everybody to take, literally a takeaway from the episode. Bex, I know I can go first and let you guys finish up. I think the point that you just brought up, funny example, when I was coaching high school, there's a kid who's now my intern, but now she's going to go play soccer in college, and who's a goalkeeper. And I was always chilling on the sideline, like right next to her, partially because I was running up and down like a neurotic little assistant coach. Different discussion. But every time she made a mistake, or even if she didn't make a mistake, she did something that was risky that we worked on in training. Immediately two things happened. She looked at me, and the entire bench looked at me, which was hysterical at one point, because I was like, what? I feel like a fish in a fishbowl. What's happening right now? But what was interesting about that was, to your point, Bex, my reaction affected her perspective on what she did, which would affect her subsequent decision-making, whether or not she was going to take that risk again. So then I had to be hyper aware of not just my body language and what, like, in terms of what that was portraying, but even the words I was going to say to her in that immediate moment, because that does inform her perspective. And we love to have like side conversations in the middle of the game and like crack a bunch of jokes. So that was typically what the response was. But even in those moments, I think that this is a different conversation from a coaching perspective and perfectionism in coaching. But I think to that extent too, it was really, really helpful for her and really important for her to see that it's, you made a mistake or you took a risk. Like, let's go. That's awesome. Now let's learn, but also what you're feeling right now is okay. And it makes sense. And it's completely rational to whatever the situation is. Now, how are you going to respond? Are you going to like chill on your goal line and never do anything and decide you don't want to make a mistake? Or are you going to continue to put yourself out there and master it at one point? So, yeah. So if I could give anybody a takeaway, it would say we need emotion to process what we're doing. It's not a bad thing for us to feel and experience our emotion or even to show it. The response is key. And we as coaches can play a role in educating our athletes on how to best respond in those instances, rather than just kind of shy away from the emotion. So I'll stop talking. Who wants to go next? What's your takeaway? What's one thing you want everybody to learn from this episode?
I'll share. So I feel like let's stick with the coaching side of things, because I know this side can just be so impactful. That's what we've been talking about the last several minutes, is how impactful the role of coach really is, whether we know it or not. Sure, you're not a parent. Yes, true, logically, right? But like you just described, all humans have the potential to teach others what or how to go through life. And that again leads to that conditioning. We can condition in a negative way, and we can help condition things in a positive way through our behaviors, our body language, the language itself that we use. So when it comes to emotions, when it comes to sensitivity, when it comes to reaching out for support or doing the inner work, I really just once again invite coaches to put in the extra effort. No one said coaching was easy, people. No one said it was easy, right? And if that's what you're in the business of, sorry, not sorry, in my opinion, you might want to find something else to do with your time, and that's fine. It's okay, right? But you want to put in the effort if we're going to consistently say, I do this for the athletes, which so many coaches say, right? I do this for the athletes. Okay. So then let's create that environment where we value emotion, where we value feeling whatever it is we feel. And that will truly allow people to stand tall in those emotions and use them to their advantage and to the advantage of the team as a whole. And guess what? We're going to end up with really beautiful human beings that we let fly off into life after sport, especially. And isn't that what it's really about?
We would love to hope. I love that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Change the currency system, almost like value it. Your emotions are so valuable versus just your performance. I love it. Bex, what's your thought?
I think I'm going to listen to this conversation 20,000 times because it's so important. And I think just what I'm coming back to so many times in my brain during this conversation, and Madeline, you touched on it earlier, and that's what triggered it in me, is just the reality of in sport, we talked about this in the beginning, emotions are and it's actually interesting. We'll use the language of my unproductive emotions or my negative emotions. And I was challenged with that one time because I was talking about that. And I said, I get frustrated on the field, and I listed all these emotions that had positive. And my mentor that I was talking to, she said, what makes those emotions unproductive? Like, what's wrong with feeling that? And it was a light bulb moment for me, because so often I think we beat ourselves up for having the frustration or the sadness or the fear or, whatever it may be, when in reality, we can be highly sensitive and feel all these things and allow ourselves to feel them and be open to them and be able to respond to them in a productive way that's actually really helpful. And I was thinking, just as we were talking, I like the analogy of, like, when you think about a team and you think about athletes, I like the analogy of like puzzle pieces, and if you're a team, every athlete plays a role. And, my puzzle piece looks different than Chris's, looks different than Madeline's, looks different than, my best friend, who's my teammate, all of these things. But you take one of those pieces out of the equation and the entire team is different. And you've lost a really important piece that completes the puzzle. And I think for these highly sensitive athletes, highly sensitive coaches, whoever it may be, when we're beating ourselves up for being highly sensitive because somehow, somewhere, we started to believe that our emotions were something to shove down and weren't going to be helpful, we squash some of the things that actually make us really, really powerful. And if we're honing in on them, empowers us to do our job on the field, as well as helping our team as a whole. So I just love the idea of, hey, stepping into your true self and saying, like, yeah, I'm highly sensitive and I'm going to own it and I'm going to learn how to use it. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And when I'm tapping into that most true self, that's actually when I'm going to shine the brightest and do my job and fulfill my role in the most effective way.
Did you read my book already? Did I accidentally send it to you? Because yes, that is it.
Love it. Bex, that's going to get put on the next piece of Behind the Mast merch. We're doing it. Let's go.
Madeline,
awesome.
I'm going to read your book in one sitting.
Same.
I'm so excited.
Yay. Oh my gosh. Okay. This was such a good conversation. I am not a morning person, but I'm very excited and energized now. So here we go.
Yeah. Awesome. So guys, we're out of time, unfortunately, because the three of us in particular, could talk for days on this. But we'll spare you guys more of our psychological jargon in here. So Madeline, again, I want to thank you for coming on the episode, dropping gems left and right, so many things. I hope you guys go back and listen. I hope you guys share with your teammates, share with your coaches, like super important. I hope you guys go get Madeline's book. It's going to be awesome. So much important information in there, such an important conversation. We will drop the information on how to get that in the show notes if that's cool with you, Madeline.
Yes, absolutely.
But as always, you guys can follow us on Instagram at Behind the Mask 3132. Find us anywhere podcasts are. Don't miss a single episode. We'll drop all of Madeline's information in the show notes. And we hope you guys hit us up, ask questions, engage with us in this conversation. But until next time, we'll catch you guys later.
Bye, guys.